So let's jump right in. What you can see here is the sad reality of one of the many natural disasters that strike our planet ever more frequently. This is Valencia a couple of weeks ago, and as you all know, this is only one of the many crises that hits us regularly. That's very present with us. So we live in the era of the poly crisis. 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries are being breached. The SDGs are widely off track. And these are just 2 kind of indicators that tell us that we are, in many respects, not on the right path. And there are several reasons why this is happening. And the one reason that we focus on is the way we currently go about allocating financial capital to address both environmental and social issues. So we believe, as many of you do, as you said before, that transforming human and natural systems is the defining challenge of our time, and that we need to go about differently when it comes to funding and allocating financial capital to bring about this transformation. And I want to explain how we think about that and how we think that systemic investing answers this call by looking at the food system or food systems in general as an example. So what you can see here is a visual impression of a typical European, also North American food system, which is characterized by industrial meat production, intensive agriculture, ultra-processed foods, and all of that contributing to many problems: climate change, soil degradation, biodiversity loss, obesity, just to name a few of them. And what we see here is an AI's vision of a sustainable, just, and healthy food system. Now, there might be many things that are wrong with this specific vision, but we can all agree that it looks fundamentally different from the pictures that we saw before. And the question is, how do we get from the status quo to this different future vision? And to get there, we need a particular type of change, not incremental change that we get with marginal improvements like new technologies, but we need deep structural change in how we grow food, how we process it, how we consume, and how we dispose of it. So we need systems transformation. Now, if you look at this through the lens of purpose-driven capital, most purpose-driven investors would subscribe to a vision for a vastly transformed future food system. But we would argue that they're not yet well positioned to catalyze this type of transformative change that is needed. And that is because they operate from the standpoint of a single type of money. So this might be market rate investment capital, this might be concessional capital, this might be non-repayable grants. People in corporations, they might look at balance sheet investments, supply chain finance. So depending on where the players of capital sit, they look at this vision through different lenses. And what happens is that depending on the lens, the landscape of investable opportunities gets scanned in different ways. So venture capitalists might see startups in alternative proteins or precision agriculture when looking at this vision. An infrastructure investor sees food processing facilities and agri-PV plants. A real estate investor sees farmland and green buildings. And a carbon market specialist sees lots of potential for new biochar projects. And then foundations see community centers, capacity building programs, maybe also awareness campaigns for farmers. So what all of this goes about to say is that if we look through the narrow lens of an individual type of asset class, we miss the whole system. It allows us to see individual nodes, but only through specific lenses and not the interconnections. We miss all the other nodes that are in place and how they interact with each other and the leverage points that might be sitting within this constellation of nodes and the emergent properties that result from all of that. So in order to see the full system, we need to apply the systems lens. And the components of this lens, they come from applied systems thinking, systems innovation, complex system science practices, and schools of thought that have been around for a while, but have not really made their way into the finance practice. But simply seeing more isn't really where it stops for capital allocators, because once we see the full picture, we also need to change how we go about deploying capital. And this is where, for us as a Swiss organization, we currently trial the Swiss Army knife approach as one way to describe systemic investing. The basic idea being Swiss Army knives have several tools, and each is capable of solving multiple problems, and each is connected to one backbone that holds them all together. So to grasp this metaphor, we need to understand that systems change is rarely the result of a single technology or a single piece of physical infrastructure or a single social enterprise. Instead, it's mostly the results from combined effects of many shifts happening within the system concurrently and in alignment. And there's multiple domains involved. There can be things like technology, business models, education, policy, social norms, all of that needs to come together to really drive transformation. That means for systems change to occur, what we need is a portfolio approach, as you can see here through all of these connections. And that means for the challenge of funding system change, that we need to create a funding architecture that spans multiple types of capital that are anchored in the system's financing needs and that match the right kinds of capital with the right kind of intervention at the right moment in time. So coming back to the army knife, it means knowing which tool to use for which problem at what point in time. And this is not really where impact investing sits today, how impact investing operates today. So usually we don't really start with the needs of the system, but more with our own capability and the money that we have at our disposal and can control. So if we happen to be a venture capitalist with access to VC, the default is to launch a new venture fund, even though not really asking if that is really what the system needs at the moment to come to a future vision, as described in the beginning. So this is essentially what systemic investing about. It's about applying systems thinking to addressing societal problems through the allocation and deployment of capital. And we have laid this out in one of our more recent publications on the hallmarks, which some of you mentioned previously, which are essentially the key components of systemic investing, spanning the whole process that sort of defines the investment process, starting with the way we analyze and look into the world, the way we approach investing, moving to how we construct our portfolios, how we align the different interventions, how we align them in a way that they amplify each other, the vehicles that these portfolios sit in, so the containers, but also the governance mechanisms that shape them, the coalitions that need to carry all these processes, and then also how financial capital interacts with other non-financial capital-based interventions and activities, be that the policy environment, be that civil society activities and actors and movements, and how all of that can be nested together. And then lastly, the point that was also mentioned before, which is quite critical: how do we actually measure all of that? How do we go about conceptualizing the very foundational question about what changes and how can we measure that, and how can we know we're on the right track? I think I'm going to skip over that. I've covered the basics of systemic investing. And so the TransCap Initiative, our organization, our mission is to build the field for systemic investing. We are a nonprofit open innovation initiative, and we are based in Switzerland, but an international team of 8 people, as Madeleine mentioned before. And our mission is to build this field and in a way try to make money a transformative force for building the different systems that we need and for grappling with the public crisis that we're faced with today. We work with lots of partners across a variety of projects, guided and advised by an advisory board, with various domains of expertise. And I think the most important slide that I'm going to end on is this one that lays out a bit clearer what we do. So our mission is quite broad, and we have these 3 pillars of work in how we try to go about working towards our mission. One of them is prototyping, which I've mentioned before, the area that I know best. It's essentially about bringing abstract conceptual ideas of what systemic investing is on paper, translating that into reality. And we do that through projects that are always place-based and focused on a specific challenge. So some of you have mentioned our work on regenerative agriculture in the US Midwest. We have a similar or related project in Switzerland. We are currently in the process of kicking off work around urban transformation with the city of Dublin. And all of these prototypes do serve the mission to create actual on-the-ground impact, but also to advance our thinking on how systemic investing can work in practice and can be scaled beyond our own activities. We have an area of research that is, on the one hand, about building the scientific arguments for systemic investing. It's about creating alignment between the various taxonomies and definitions that are already out there. The question of how to conceptualize of systemic impact is a very present and pressing question that we're grappling with in that field. And also the question of metrics and measurement models. And lastly, field building, where it's about getting the word out on systemic investing. It's about bringing people together, as we do in this call and as we do through various convenings and different places around different and various thematic areas, and also through our own large-scale signature convenings, the first of which we had at the beginning of this year, our Systemic Investing Summit in Boston at MIT. Some of the projects I touched upon already, a few prototypes at the moment with a strong focus on food. Another prototype also focused on Switzerland around mobility, something around urban transformation. We're just in the process of launching a project around IMM in the context of systems change, where we work with MIT again as research partner, and various kind of field building efforts where we work with lots of partners, the Impact being one of our strongest supporters for a few years, Twist and the Deep Transitions Lab as related organizations doing similar work to ours, bringing stakeholders together and trying to get systems thinking into investing